Welcome to FinTech Podden, the podcast that features thought-provoking discussions with leaders and founders within the fintech industry. From core banking to Bitcoin, we cover it all. Now, get ready for the next episode. Hello, and a very welcome back to FinTech Podden. In today's episode, which we are recording on Tuesday, 18th of May, we are joined by a very interesting guest, Christopher von Beetzen from FrejaEID. Very welcome to FinTech Podden, Christopher.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, really nice to have you here. And how's your? It's early morning. How's your day been so far?
Well, it's been sunny, and I'm all up for sharing some really interesting thoughts with you guys on this interesting topic.
Yeah, we're going to talk about EID, of course, and about your company, Freja. But before we jump into that, could you let our listeners know a little bit about you?
Yep, sure. I'm the Chief Product Officer at FrejaEID. I've been working with the company for 10 years, and we're kind of Sweden's oldest startup. I'll get back to how that all works. We really transformed this company into something new. And before that, I was in PR and marketing. I had my own agency, and I enjoy writing. I've written a couple of books on poker strategy. I've written a novel actually on the perfect finance crime. So if you're interested in the financial industry and you like a good thriller novel, I can definitely recommend you my book.
Oh, nice.
So that's a few words about me.
That's two very interesting topics to me. You said poker strategy, right?
Yeah. So back in the poker boom days, 50 years ago, I realized that the best way of making money out of poker was either to start a poker site or to write a poker strategy book. A lot of people were starting poker sites, so I decided let's write a book. So I was actually the best-selling poker book for some years in Sweden. So that was kind of
nice. I chose to be the player. So
how did it go?
Well, I actually lived from poker in three years after gymnasium. So I have fifth place in a Swedish championship of online poker, and I won Melbourne Cup in Australia. I played World Series of Poker. So I've been pretty deep into poker.
I'm impressed. Wow.
I'm gonna buy your book, and
and we can take a match at some point and see.
Yeah.
No.
Really. And then financial crime is also a really interesting topic. We will soon have a guest talking about scams and crimes in crypto, for example. So
yeah.
It's really interesting, but we're not here to talk about that.
No.
Now, what can you tell us a little bit about the background to and the history to Freja? How did it end up becoming Freja? You haven't had that name for so long, right?
No, that's right. We've been the company was started back in 2002 as a company called Verisec at the time. It was a purely IT security company and with focus on digital identity. And back in those days, digital identity was a concern for a very few number of players, mainly the banks and hardware tokens. So we started doing and distributing and provisioning securely these hardware tokens for the Swedish banks. And that became a big industry for us and a profitable business. But at some point we saw that hardware tokens is not the future, and especially as the smartphone came along and so on. So we saw that the smartphone could be a better bearer of digital identity than tokens. In parallel with this, we had in Sweden a very interesting ecosystem that emerged that's called BankID, where all the big banks went together and created an EID scheme that was firstly used for the banks and then for the whole society, so to say. And they were a real trailblazer in this electronic identity field. And at some point we realized that, this is they've created the monopoly and they're taking over industry by industry. And as with all monopolies, they should be broken. It's not healthy to have a monopoly situation. And everyone said, no, how can you challenge Bank ID? They are everywhere and so on. And, if you say that to me and my colleagues, it's like, we get even more inspired. So we're going to do this. So we started back in 2017. We launched FrejaEID. We got it, governmentally approved in the beginning of 2018. And then we started, growing the whole ecosystem. At the same time, VeriSec, with all our business, had grown to, banking solutions in Mexico and hardware, crypto solutions in the Middle East and offices in Dubai and so on. So we were like shooting at, not two rabbits with one gun. We were shooting with one gun against like 5 rabbits on 6 continents. It was like totally crazy. So, and at the same time, we saw that, our cloud offering with FrejaEID, that was the future. We had seen competitors going the cloud route before us. For example, Okta. I don't know if you know about that company, but they came. It's an American company. They came from nowhere and grew their business. Now they're like a 30 billion market cap kind of IT security company in the United States. And so we saw that the whole cloud thing, growing, and we saw that Bank ID with their offering, had a solution to something interesting, because in the rest of the world, the electronic identities of the Swedish kind was non-existent. And we saw that if we can do this in Sweden and then scale it to other countries, we're really onto something. So that's kind of our ambition and our goal. And then last year we sold off some of the legacy business and focused solely on FrejaEID. And that's why we also changed the name of the company to Freja.
Nice. And where does the name Freja actually come from? Do you have a story, or did you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, it's the goddess of love and fertility in the Norse mythology. And back in the days when we started out doing our proprietary IT security solutions for banks and for municipalities and public sector and so on, we had an idea that in the UK they had a need for a 2-factor authentication solution. So 3 of my colleagues went there, and this was before I started, so I shouldn't take any credit for this. They went there and they pitched the idea of this 2-factor identity solution to Salford Council, which is a small council in the Manchester area. And the IT director there at Salford said, "Yeah, this sounds really great, guys. Can you have it in a month?" And they're like, yeah, sure. And it was just an idea, they hadn't a clue on how to do this. So they went back and started thinking, how can we do this? Had a new meeting with the guy the day after and said, yeah, sure, we can serve you with this in a month, no problem at all. And the name, and then they were like at breakfast on the hotel, they knew they needed to have a name for this product. So they thought, in the UK with the Vikings history and so on, let's call it something Norse. So Freja just became the name out of that breakfast, and it has stuck ever since. Mm. But then it as it so happened, I mean, all the other, the big tech companies started calling their assistants with female names like Siri and Alexa and so on. But we were actually before them with Freja, just to note.
Good story. But as you said, like in the Swedish area or Nordic area, we have some like bank collaborations called Bank ID and so on. Yeah. How would you compare yourself towards their product? Like, how do you position yourself? Could you discover a bit on the market? Like, where do you fit in, and do you compete, or can you collaborate with the banks that issue Bank ID as well?
Well, I would say it's like what's the difference between a traditional bank, that's been around for 100 years, and a fintech company? It's like, well, they're serving in the same area and so on, but the fintech company has a different approach to innovation and to customer experience and to customer obsession and so on. I'm defining Freja not just as an electronic identity. I'm defining it as a tool that you as a user can use to share all your relevant data with consent. Okay, So for example, Bank ID, they've got your civic registration number, personnummer as it's called in Sweden. And that's the kind of attribute that connects you to all the different services. And that's fine, it works great in Sweden because everyone has your SSN or CRN. But as you know, you have so much more data that you need to share in the digital world. So we have created Freja around, you as an individual. And then we attach different attributes and data to you as mobile phone number, email address, your address, and this civic registration number, of course, and a lot of other things. In a few weeks we'll be releasing support for the green certificate, your COVID vaccination data, for example. Things you can share online with consent to allow you to do different things in KYC situations and so on. So we're about giving back the control to the user of your data, not letting the banks or big US tech companies just have your data and make trillions out of it. It's your data, and we give you a tool so you can share that with consent in all your day-to-day situations.
Interesting. We're going to come back to the KYC part and talk a little bit about open banking and so on. But before we jump into that area, where are you biggest today? I know that I always see your logo and can log in, and I do, on governmental websites such as Skatteverket, the Pensionsmyndigheten, etc. But where are you biggest today?
But first of all, we have the ambition to do things outside of Sweden. That's the whole point, that we can grow this ecosystem outside of Sweden. But we need to start here, and we have focused very much on Sweden the past few years. So now we're having I think around 285 or something agreements with different customers, and it's a lot of in public sector. So as you mentioned, tax authority, municipalities, and so on. But we also have gambling companies like ATG and Svenska Spel. We have financial companies like Resource Bank. We have e-commerce customers and so on. So it's really spreading in all different verticals. But what's kind of driven our biggest usage the past year obviously has been in e-health. So for logging in, for example, to 1177 to book corona tests, and now booking vaccine, and different apps for connecting to doctors and so on. So e-health has been a real driver the past year.
If we can take a look at your business model, how does it work? Like both from the companies or governments you work with, but also from the private side. How does the product look like, and how does your business model fit the different players or actors in this ecosystem?
Yeah. So first of all, we have you can do different things. Different data is worth different things. So, for example, a very simple authentication where you just say yes and no. That's has a quite low value. Whereas, for example, in a KYC onboarding situation, you get a lot of data, but then it's worth much more per transaction. So we have both these, transaction-based costs, and that is differentiated depending on what kind of transaction you're making. And then we also have a kind of revenue. It's a subscription model where companies pay a fixed fee each month to use Freja as much as they want. And one thing that differs Freja from other solutions is that we offer both a solution for private use and one solution for work-related electronic identities. And that's a big thing as well. So those companies mostly choose the subscription model. So we have this, revenue coming in from these contracts, and then we have, this scaling of all these tick-based revenues as well. And for the user, it's all free of charge.
And just before we move on into some different use cases, can you describe the process of signing up to FrejaEID? Because that is a bit different, right, from the traditional bank IDs.
Yeah, and that's one of the drivers why we're getting a lot of not least young people, and I have teenage daughters myself. They have Freja, but they also have bank ID because, you know, it's pretty difficult to live without. I think you're going to need to have at least two EIDs in a country like Sweden for you know, foreseeable future. So getting the bank ID for my daughter, both me and my wife had to find the time in a calendar, together with our daughter's calendar, to go down to the city and find a bank that was open at one of these hours and sign papers. And that took some time. And with Freja, you register through the app, you document your ID document. If you have a passport, you scan it with an NFC chip and, you know, quite advanced technology that we have developed ourselves. You take a selfie, we compare that selfie with the image on the ID document and with algorithms and so on. And then we have a security center here in Stockholm where we do a manual vetting of all the people that is onboarded. So we're actually liable. And that's one thing that differentiates us from other solutions. We vouch for each identity. So when you come aboard as a user and you have managed to trick us, we are kind of liable for that. So we share your risk in any given situation, and that's pretty unique. And that's, if you think about, for example, another fintech example, Klarna, that has done the same thing when it comes to the risk of customers not paying. I would say that's one of the success factors for Klarna, is that actually they dare to take that risk. And that's a bold and cool move that has set them apart from other fintech players. So I think about sharing risk is a key differentiator. And this means that we're not just a technology provider. Since we take the risk, we need to make sure that you are you. So we develop this technology really thoroughly, and it's all approved by the government, this process and so on. So that's pretty much how you do it. And here in Sweden, to come to the highest level in order to log into tax authority, you also need to do a physical visit and show your ID card. And this is really ancient in a way, because these rules in Sweden were written 10 years ago. And in the UK, where we are now in the process of becoming certified, we can come to the same level using our AI technology, face recognition, NFC, and so on. So I guess in Sweden, the physical visit will be, you know, abandoned in maybe 5-10 years, who knows? But until then, it's a requirement to do that.
And when you say sharing the risk, does that mean that you, if I were to trick you of being someone else and then go into, for example, Skatteverket, tax authority, and trick them, then you share we
have a kind of liability insurances for that kind of thing, and it's an interesting use case. I mean, if you would go into tax authority and pay my tax, I wouldn't say anything about it. just leave it at that. But that's the whole point, and that's why we're saying we're selling trust, not technology. There's a bunch of other companies like, you know, Onfido, Jumio, and you know, there's a bunch of them that sells technology where they do ID verification, and you know, that's one thing, but selling trust is a totally different thing, and that's our business, and that's why we're investing so heavily in our ecosystem as we do.
Yeah. And you mentioned your plans to going outside of Sweden. How's that going for you, and what's the plan there?
Yeah, so we have launched in the Nordic countries, and we have also launched in the UK, but that is not like a real commercial launch to say. We have a few customers using it in these countries on a very small level, so to say. But we believe that the way we use EIDs in Sweden will become the standard in the rest of the world. Sometimes I compare to let's say that Spotify had figured out streaming music, and it was only in Sweden, in the whole world, where they use streaming music, and everywhere else they were buying CD records, and no one else was taking that opportunity. It's like, and that's actually how it looks. Everyone else is selling CD records out there, and I think we're the only one, or one of the very, very few, that is a government approved EID with ambitions to go, you know, internationally. So that's a really exciting proposition, and I think the next big thing for us will be the UK, because they are now coming with a certification process where you can be vetted against a standard from the government, and then you will be accessible for banks and for tax authorities and so on. And it's a huge market, obviously, and it's totally virgin. There is no solutions at all. So that's maybe a different challenge compared to challenging a monopoly market in Sweden and coming to a virgin market in a new country. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. But looking a bit further into fintech specifically, we have many challenges around KYC, anti-money laundering, etc. And we recently had the financial super authority, Finansinspektionen, coming out and telling a fintech called Trustly that they need to follow some certain rules more than they do. How can you help in this area, and what are you doing within the fintech space?
Well, basically, if you look at what the regulations say, the KYC regulations from the EU and from the Swedish government, they ask you as a financial operator to identify your users, to figure out the purpose of what they're going to do, and the scale of their business, so to say. And the two latter things, I mean, you can ask those things in an onboarding process, where do your money come from, and how much you're going to, invest and spend and so on. So that's pretty easy to just get the reply. But to identify someone, that's pretty tough. I mean, you can ask me. We've been working now for a few years to build this identity ecosystem. You don't do that in an instance. And that's why all the fintech companies, for example, have kind of piggybacked on BankID in Sweden. And in other countries, they I don't know exactly from country to country, but it's like since the PSD2 regulations allow the reuse of the authentication method, I think in the fintech industry, this has been confused with you can reuse the fundamental identification of the user. And I don't think that's the intention of the lawmaker. And that's what I think the Finansinspektionen has figured out, right? And this is huge. And this is, if you think about it, if you take what's the value of an account? So you have the PSD2 regulations and all the open banking stuff that allows you to access accounts and do transfers and stuff like that. Okay. So what's the value of the account for SEB, for example, or Handelsbanken? The account, that's just a piece of, a database. An account is nothing more than an entry in a database currently. It's not like they have the vaults anymore and the guards with machine guns outside. So the account itself, it's really cheap. It has no value at all. It's the protection of that account and the identity of the user. So the banks have done all this fundamental identity and identification of the users. And now the fintech companies want to reuse that. And I think at some point, the big banks will say that, hey guys, this is not really, because if the big value, the real estate, so to say, of a bank account is the identification of the user, you as a bank, you don't want to give that away. And that's going to be a tough awakening for many fintech companies that rely on solutions like BankID. And my guess is that it's not the wise decision for a fintech company that says, I'm going to challenge you big banks and then rely on the big banks' identity solution. At some point, they can say, well, you cannot use it. I mean, you can, to an extent, you can rely on the PSD2 regulations that says you can, use our authentication, but not our fundamental identification. And that's a huge difference. And that's where we come in.
That's really interesting. It reminds me of a book I read that was called Digital ID is the New Money a few years ago. And it's so crucial, the ID part in a digital world. And talking about that, like where do you see that you will gain the most usage over the foreseeable future?
Well, I think we can actually, when fintech companies, for example, start to understand that, it's quite a good idea to have a relation to our end users. So we have kind of our own identity relation. We can supply that, and we're neutral. We're not a big bank that at some point will say that, now you can't use it anymore. We can help you to identify your users properly. Okay, so that means that you have a really good opportunity to create much more value, and in that space, I think Freja will be used, you know, as a natural partner. And you don't partner up with your competitors anymore. You partner up with the only real challenger in the financial industry. And today I would say FrejaEID is the only real challenger in the Swedish banking market. Everyone else is just going with the big banks. You know, try to find a fintech that doesn't use BankID. It doesn't exist, right?
But if we look at the PSD2 regulation, for example, does the regulation support the use of, for example, FrejaEID for me as an end user to access my banking data at different banks? Like,
no.
How does the regulation stands in this?
So the regulation says that the bank needs to allow you to use your existing authentication method to transfer money with a fintech company. So it doesn't say that you could use any authentication method like Freja or something like that. So that's just the authentication part of the how should I put it, the transaction. Let me give you an example. If I shop with Klarna, which I think is a brilliant business, and you know, I love to use it. I buy something online and I identify myself with BankID. You know, and then I come to my Klarna account and I log in with BankID. So there's two identification situations I've done with Klarna. And the third one is when I decide to pay. And then I also use Klarna to identify myself. It's only this third one that's regulated by the PSD2. Klarna cannot lean on PSD2 to you know, have me to log in to Klarna, or not even to kind of approve the purchase. And that's why I'm saying that you as a fintech company should have your own relation to your customers, and then you can rely on what the PSD2 regulation says about the authentication. But accessing your own service, you know, the login to a fintech company should not be based on your competitor solutions, right? That's crucial, and you need to think about this. Otherwise, you know, this might be the biggest Trojan horse ever. You know, the banks are saying, you know, come on here, come all in. And then, you know, they drive the horse into Troy, and there you go.
Yeah, really interesting thoughts there with the Trojan horse. But is it possible for me as a customer using would it be possible to bring with me my KYC answers and all the things, that the information that I leave to a bank? Because today, if I log into 6 different fintech apps and so on, I need to answer the questions over and over again. Could it be possible to bring it with me with a solution like Freja?
Yeah. I mean, definitely. Most of the questions are kind of persistent over time. So where do you get your income? You know, you have a fixed income, or you know, a freelance, and you know, stuff like that. And then there are a few questions which I guess needs to be answered at each and every point. So what are you gonna do with your money at this particular service? But if you have like 10, 15 questions, normally we could give you the identity, you know, the answers to 10 of the most important questions, and the identity data and the digital signature, you know, where you sign all the agreements and so on. And you do this by scanning a QR code on your website, and then you answer 2 questions, and then you're onboarded. So that's how we see the future of Freja, that you have your data. And for me as a user, it's so much more convenient to do it like this. And for you as a service, it's so much, you know, remove all that hassle of becoming a customer. It's like one click onboarding. That's how I foresee it.
Yeah, it would help a lot to be able to bring with me my own data, I would say. So
yes. So that's the whole business idea of Freja. And then when you have that kind of data, you know, it has a different value. If I come to you, to your fintech company, and say, I want to become a customer, then you can pay Freja a bit more than just a simple authentication. And then we can start scaling our business model and directing our users to different partners that we have. Now we have 300 agreements, as I said, and we have 150,000 users, and when we start matching users and services, it becomes really interesting because we have the data, because we have the consent. And if you still think, oh, this is just another bank ID, then maybe this opens your eyes a bit.
Yeah. But I think we need to round off this discussion. It has been super interesting, and I think we have learned a lot about this space. But before we round up, like if, for example, a fintech is listening into this episode, where can they find more information about how they can use your services and sign up to start use them and so on?
Yeah, so it's pretty easy to connect with us through our API and OpenID Connect and our test environment and so on. So FrejaEID.com is the address. And if you want to get in touch with me, it's info@FrejaEID.com, and I'll help you with all your questions and ideas and so on. So we'd be happy to talk to you and see how we can be of assistance.
Perfect.
Great. Yeah, as you said, Johan, it's been a true pleasure to have you here. Thank you a lot, Christopher, and we wish you the best of luck going forward with the FrejaEID.
Thank you, and just a final word there. So I understand that you have it, Gustav, but all of you listeners, you go and get Freja now. You download it on your mobile. And what you can start doing right now, and I forgot to mention, is that you can use it instead of your physical ID document. So me and myself, I've been, using only my mobile now for almost soon a year, from the 1st of September. So I have Apple Pay to pay, and I have Freja to identify myself when I pick up parcels, go to the pharmacy, and so on. So if you want to really be out there on the edge of technology, get Freja and leave the plastic at home.
One question on that, like I've heard or some rumors that it's working at Systembolaget, like the liquor shop stores in Sweden. Is that true?
Well, we are approved by the, we got the kind of vouching from Svensk Handel, which is one of these organizations. And we have ATG that officially has approved it for physical use. But other than that, I cannot, vouch for it for any particular organization. So
I've tried the last few times at the liquor store, Systembolaget, but they believe I'm too old, so they never ask anymore.
They never. That's a tricky one.
Yeah. But talking about that, there is a feature in the app, FrejaEID Plus. Could you just tell the users you need to go to an ATG or something?
Yes, and that is to come up to that level that is required to log into, for example, the tax authority and certain public sector services. And other services, for example, ATG and Svenska Spel, they don't require that level. So it's more of a regulation thing that public sector requires a certain higher level of trust than the others. But in our eyes, it's pretty much, a very high level of trust anyway. So it's probably good enough. Okay. For most services.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
And that was it for today's episode. We hope that you liked it. Both I and Johan are very happy and thankful that you're listening to us. And if you like what we do here, please go into iTunes or whatever platform you're listening from and leave a review or a rate. We would appreciate that a lot. We will soon be back with another episode, and until then, have a good time.